My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 51 years old, a composer by trade, a husband by promise, and a father by grace. For most of my adult life, I believed that if you nurtured a home with enough love and consistency, it would shelter you back when storms came. I've since learned that even the most solid walls can conceal fractures, and when those fractures spread, they don't make a sound until something gives way. Started on a warm evening in late spring, the kind of day that reminds you life can be simple, if only briefly. The air smelled like new blooms and cut grass, and the sky had that faint orange haze that comes just before dusk. I remember the moment not because anything monumental happened, at least not right away, but because of how ordinary it all seemed. The kind of ordinary you later realize was camouflage. I came home earlier than usual. A recording session at the studio had been canceled last minute due to a technical glitch, and I didn't feel like rescheduling. I figured I'd use the time to surprise Kate with dinner or perhaps just share an hour together before Ellie returned from her study group. We hadn't had much of that lately. Time that felt unplanned, unscheduled. I missed it. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Nothing visible, no alarm bells, just a subtle sense, like arriving somewhere familiar and realizing something's been moved. The porch light was on, though it wasn't dark yet. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't completely out of the ordinary, but Kate was meticulous. She triple-checked locks even when we were both home. Inside, the scent of red wine and perfume greeted me like a ghost still in the room. On the coffee table were 2 glasses. One was half full. The other bore a faint imprint of a lipstick I didn't recognize. Kate's was usually more neutral, less vivid. A man's jacket lay draped over the arm of the couch. Soft gray wool, expensive-looking. Definitely not mine. It was positioned too comfortably, as if the owner felt right at home. My first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was confusion. The TV was off, the room was quiet, and aside from the glasses and the coat, the space looked undisturbed. I called out once, not loudly. I didn't want to seem alarmed. I wanted this to make sense. Near the hallway bench, I spotted another detail that shouldn't have been there. One of Kate's high heels, lying on its side like it had been kicked off in a hurry. I picked it up absently. She usually kept her shoes in the bedroom closet. This felt chaotic in a way that didn't fit her. A door clicked in the hallway. I turned just in time to see Kate emerge from the bathroom, drying her hands. Her face looked slightly flushed, but her expression was composed. She was wearing a blouse I hadn't seen before. Something satiny, deep blue, more suited to evening wear than a casual work-at-home day. Her hair was damp around the edges, as if she'd rinsed off quickly. She acted as though everything was normal. A quick kiss on the cheek, a passing smile, and a breezy comment about a colleague who had stopped by to discuss a presentation. Something about him being in the area and it being easier to go over things in person. She waved a hand toward the coat and said he must have forgotten it. She chuckled, shrugged, moved on. But her tone was off. Too fast. Too practiced. I stood still as she walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking with mechanical rhythm. Something in me tightened. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But something had shifted, like I had just watched her perform a scene and had been cast in it without knowing the script. Later that evening, we ate dinner together, but she seemed distracted. Her phone buzzed twice and she glanced at it, once even replying while I cleared the dishes. She wasn't usually like that. Kate was present, grounded, at least she used to be. The distance between us wasn't in the room, but in the silence between her words. When I asked her how her day had gone, she gave me a quick summary and changed the subject. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe I was projecting insecurities onto nothing. I'd been under pressure lately, working on a short film score for a demanding director. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe she really did have a colleague drop by. But if so, why hadn't she mentioned it earlier that day? Why leave wine glasses out like that? Why the flushed face, the unfamiliar clothes, the half-closed door? That night, after she went to bed, I stood in the living room for a long time. I stared at the coat that still sat draped over the chair. I reached into the pocket, then paused. I didn't want to be that man, the one who doubts, who invades, who assumes the worst. But even as I walked away, I knew the question had already taken root. It wasn't what I found that night. It was what I felt. The beginning of absence. The coldness that creeps in when the air between two people changes shape. I didn't accuse her. I didn't dig deeper, not yet. But that night, something subtle and vital cracked under the weight of doubt. It's strange how the mind works. How it catalogs small things and buries them until a pattern emerges. I wouldn't understand the full picture for weeks to come. But that night was the first time I looked at my wife and saw someone unfamiliar wearing her face. The first crack doesn't scream. It whispers. In the days that followed, life returned to its routine on the surface. Kate moved through the house like nothing had shifted. Like she hadn't spun a half-truth that night or left behind an echo I couldn't silence. She was always composed, polished. And perhaps that was the problem. Her stillness no longer comforted me. Concealed something. First, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, convincing myself I had imagined it all. That the wine glasses, the coat, her flushed face, her hasty explanation were all explainable if I just stopped obsessing. But denial is a short-lived Dr*G. And the truth, like rot beneath paint, always resurfaces. Kate's late nights began to multiply. She used to text me if she was working late. But now I'd often find out from the cold dinner I'd left covered on the stove, untouched. She'd offer vague excuses about presentations that had to be reviewed, or working dinners with senior managers, always said with that detached tone professionals master after years in boardrooms. But the way she said it, it wasn't just distant. It was deliberately distant, as if she were drawing a line in the air between our lives and hers. Then came the trips. At first, they were quarterly, normal, expected. But over time, they came faster. Twice a month. Then weekly. Some made sense. Others didn't. Chicago, San Francisco, New York, major hubs for finance, sure. But then came cities like Austin or Denver, places where, to my knowledge, her bank had no real footprint. She told me it was strategy work, that she was leading a task force exploring new partnerships. I nodded. I wanted to believe her. But I started keeping track. Not spying, not yet, just observing. Her departures grew shorter in notice. She stopped asking me to take her to the airport. She booked her own rides, sometimes left while I was asleep, leaving behind only a text and a carefully packed suitcase already by the door. I remember one trip in particular. She was supposed to be gone for 3 days. She returned after 5. Said the meetings had run longer than expected and the team had decided to extend their stay for networking. But when I asked who was on the trip with her, she hesitated before answering. She listed 2 names I'd never heard before, claimed they were from a new acquisition. It didn't feel like a lie. Felt worse. Rehearsed. She started dressing differently too. I don't mean provocatively. Not in the way people often assume, but deliberately, confidently, as if every outfit had been curated for attention. Her old wardrobe had been elegant and subtle, the kind of sharp professionalism that didn't invite the eye but commanded it. Now her clothes had an edge. Sleek cuts, bold colors, a quiet defiance. She was no longer dressing for the boardroom. She was dressing for something else. Someone else. Our bedroom changed too. Not all at once. At first, it was just that she started sleeping with her back to me. Then she began turning in early, claiming exhaustion. Sometimes she stayed up late, saying she had calls with international teams. Yet when I passed the door, I rarely heard the distinct rhythm of meetings or the soft clatter of a keyboard. Just silence. Or soft music. Or nothing at all. Her phone became an extension of her body. She used to leave it on the nightstand or the kitchen counter. Now it was always in her hand or face down beside her. Notifications came and went without sound. One night she changed her passcode. I noticed because I picked it up absent-mindedly while setting the table. It vibrated in my hand, and when I looked at the lock screen, the familiar access code didn't work. She saw me and laughed it off, said IT had forced everyone at work to change their settings. But she never gave me the new code. And then there was her laptop. She once worked freely around the house, on the sofa, at the dining table, wherever she could find space. Now, she worked almost exclusively in the study. The door was closed more often than not, and when I knocked, she would emerge a few moments later, composed, closing her screen like it held trade secrets. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination poison the calm we'd built. But then I noticed how quiet our dinners had become. Kate used to talk about everything, her day, the markets, her frustrations with management. Now, she picked at her food, asked perfunctory questions about Ellie or my work, and fell into long silences. The conversation became a routine, ritualized, and shallow. No curiosity, no warmth, no int asterisk Macy. Even with Ellie, something had shifted. Kate had always been attentive, even if not overly affectionate. She checked in on homework, reminded her of deadlines, asked about college applications. But now she seemed distracted when Ellie spoke, like she was listening through a filter. Their interactions became shorter, functional. Ellie noticed too. She once told me Mom seemed plugged into a different station. I smiled at the metaphor, but inside, it cut deeper than I let on. One weekend, I suggested we drive up to the Blue Ridge Mountains, just the three of us like we used to. The weather was perfect. Ellie had a break between school projects, and I needed to feel something different than the stagnant quiet of our house. Kate declined, said she had a planning retreat scheduled, said it couldn't be rescheduled, said she was exhausted and needed space to recharge. Space. That word lingered. She didn't ask me to go with her. Didn't say she wished she could come. She wanted to be away from us. The thing about patterns is that they don't lie. One moment out of place can be explained. But when the moments become rhythms, predictable, repeatable, you either look away or you face what they're telling you. I began to notice the time she spent on her appearance before each trip. The careful way she packed. The way her voice lifted ever so slightly when a call came through and she thought I couldn't hear. I started hearing the name Brendan more often, just in passing. He was a colleague, she said, part of her strategic team. She spoke about him the way people speak of a new car or a recently discovered restaurant, admiring, casual, too often to be truly casual. I looked him up one night. Brendan Hale. He was younger than Kate by 6 years. Harvard grad. Rising star. His name had started appearing in industry publications. A photo popped up, him at a company retreat, standing beside a group of execs. There was Kate, her body angled subtly toward him. Both smiling. Could have meant nothing. Or it could have meant everything. That was the cruelty of it. Ambiguity wrapped in plausibility. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I waited. I collected each fragment and stored them in silence. Some nights, I lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep beside me. I watched the rise and fall of her breathing. I wondered if she still dreamed of the life we'd built, or if she had already stepped into another, one she hadn't yet told me about. I told myself that maybe this was what long marriages looked like, ebbs and flows, phases of distance. But deep down, I knew, this wasn't a phase. It was a migration. She was no longer with me. Not fully. Not honestly. And once you begin to see the cracks, you can't unsee them. You notice every hairline fracture, every hollow gesture, every closed door that used to be open. By the time summer arrived, I wasn't living with a stranger. I was living with someone who was no longer trying to hide that she had already left. The truth, when it finally came, didn't scream its arrival. It crept in quietly, as it always does, through a crack left unattended, through a channel I had long forgotten existed. One afternoon, while cleaning out a cabinet in my studio, I stumbled upon an old iPad. It hadn't been used in years, originally a shared device, mostly for Ellie's school projects or for browsing recipes while we cooked together. It was covered in a fine layer of dust, its rubber case worn along the edges. I almost tossed it in the donate pile, but a flicker of curiosity made me charge it instead. When it powered on, the past rushed back. Photos, apps, unfinished notes. I expected nothing of consequence. At most, a few old videos or Ellie's childhood selfies. But something had changed. The iPad had synced itself automatically to a cloud account I no longer remembered attaching. More precisely, to Kate's account. Her photos, fresh ones, had appeared there, caught in the invisible net of shared devices we'd set up back when we still trusted each other implicitly. The screen populated slowly, and I scrolled without purpose, almost absently. A few dozen images, thumbnails at first. And then my thumb stopped. There she was, Kate, standing in a hotel room I didn't recognize. The windows behind her framed a gray skyline. Chicago, unmistakably. I'd been there just once with her years ago. But this room, this backdrop, it was new. She wore a dress I remembered. The deep emerald one from a gala we'd attended together a year prior. Her smile was wide, her posture relaxed. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at someone behind it. The next image was worse. She was sitting at a dinner table in the same hotel suite, her chin resting in her hand, a half-finished glass of wine in front of her. Across the table, blurred by motion, was a man leaning forward. I recognized him. Brendan Hale. I told myself it was a professional dinner. I tried to breathe slowly, to quiet the roar that was beginning to build behind my eyes. But I kept scrolling, and the lies unraveled like film unspooling from a broken reel. There were more photos, too many to explain away. Kate and Brendan in a spa robe standing by a window. Kate barefoot, curled on a love seat beside him, wine bottle between them. Kate in bed, yes, in bed, half-covered, eyes sleepy, smiling directly into the camera. The sheet pulled just far enough for ambiguity, but not far enough to offer innocence. The captions beneath some of the photos stung worse than the images. Phrases like, "Another secret night with you," and "Wish this could last longer." They were reckless, giddy. Not the words of a reluctant woman swept into a mistake, but those of someone fully alive in her deception. I don't remember how long I sat there, iPad in hand. Minutes, probably. Maybe more. I felt sick. Viscerally, physically sick. The kind of nausea that has nothing to do with your stomach and everything to do with your soul rejecting what it's being asked to accept. This wasn't a flirtation. This wasn't office chemistry gone too far. It was a life, an alternate life, one that had been curated, nurtured, fed in silence and darkness while our own marriage withered in the light. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was spatial, emotional. It was the fact that while I had been watching old films with Ellie, while I had been composing scores late into the night to keep us afloat, Kate had been slipping into a parallel reality where I no longer existed. I went for a walk. I don't know how far I went. I remember passing the corner store, crossing 2 neighborhoods, eventually ending up by a small lake we used to visit when Ellie was younger. I sat on a bench, the iPad still clutched in my hand like a cursed relic. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt nothing. That dangerous kind of nothing that sits like ice behind your ribs. When I returned home, the house was quiet. Kate wasn't back yet. I walked through the rooms slowly, letting the silence confirm what I already knew. She was gone, in all the ways that mattered. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. I watched her move around the kitchen when she returned, watched her pour herself tea, checked her reflection in the microwave door. She moved like someone still playing the part, still reciting the lines. I realized then how much energy she must have been spending to keep the performance going, and how exhausted she must be beneath the mask. In the following days, I withdrew without explanation. Not coldly, just quietly. I stopped trying to make plans, stopped asking questions, stopped initiating conversations. I watched her subtly react. How her eyes flicked toward me when I was silent at dinner, how she touched her phone more often, how she asked questions not to connect but to measure how close I still was. She sensed the shift, but didn't name it. Neither did I. But things couldn't remain unspoken for long. The tipping point came from the smallest mistake. One evening, she left her laptop open on the dining table when a call came through the house phone. She picked up and stepped outside to speak. The screen hadn't locked yet. It was like fate had cracked the door open just far enough for me to see what I needed to see. I didn't pry. I didn't dig. I simply looked at what was already open. An email thread. Brendan's name in the header. Dozens of exchanges. Some were logistical, flights, hotels. But others, "I can still smell your shampoo on my jacket. I hated watching you leave the lobby like that. I miss you already." And her replies, "Me too. counting the days. I wish we didn't have to hide. There it was. Proof. Hard, sharp, undeniable. I closed the laptop before she returned, sat in silence, and listened to the front door open and close. My hands were calm, but my mind raced. Not with revenge, not even with heartbreak, but with clarity. She wasn't mine anymore. She had left, and I had been the last to know. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to a friend's cabin 2 hours north. I didn't leave a note. I didn't text. I needed distance, not drama. I needed to feel what it was like to breathe without watching someone else's shadow move around me. When she called later that day, I let it ring. And the next. And the next. By the third day, she stopped trying. It was Ellie who reached out. She asked if I was okay. I told her yes, that I just needed time away to think. She didn't press. But I knew she understood more than she let on. Children always know. When I returned a week later, Kate was gone. Not permanently, her things were still there. But she had taken a suitcase. No note, no call, just gone. And the space she left behind felt cleaner than it should have. I spent that night walking through our home. Every room, every hallway. I stopped at our wedding photo by the stairs and stared at it for a long time. We looked happy. Maybe we were. But happiness, I've learned, isn't armor. It doesn't protect you from change, or betrayal, or the simple, selfish pull of desire dressed up as destiny. What shattered me most wasn't that she had loved someone else. It was that I had become irrelevant in her story, and she hadn't even noticed. Separation isn't a single moment. It's not the day someone walks out or the night the truth is finally undeniable. It's slower, quieter, like an old painting fading in the sun. Color leaving one brushstroke at a time until you forget how vivid it once was. After Kate left that week, we stopped pretending. There was no dramatic argument, no bags hurled down the stairs. Just a gradual unwinding. A few exchanged messages, some silence, and then a final conversation over coffee at a neutral cafe where we negotiated civility like diplomats from collapsing nations. We agreed on the terms. The house would be sold. The proceeds divided evenly. Ellie would finish her last year of school in peace. We would spare her the ugliness of lawyers, accusations, or custody battles. That was the deal, neat, bloodless, but devastating in its coldness. Kate moved into a high-rise apartment closer to her office. Brendan followed not long after. Within 4 months, the rumors at her firm became headlines in industry blogs. 2 rising stars in finance, once peers, now a power couple. By the end of the year, they were married in a destination ceremony that looked like something from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Aspen, I think. Or maybe Vale. I never asked. I never wanted to know, but people told me anyway. Their wedding photos circulated through mutual circles. Kate in a minimalist designer gown. Brendan in a dark tailored suit. Both of them posed against the snow, smiling like the world had always intended this version of events. My absence wasn't even acknowledged. I had been written out of the narrative entirely, as if I'd never existed. But life didn't collapse for me. Not in the way they likely assumed it would. Instead, it reshaped itself quietly, deliberately. I threw myself into work, and oddly, the heartbreak gave me something sharper than inspiration. Urgency. I started saying yes to projects I'd once declined. I collaborated with directors whose visions had mitigated me before. I took risks with soundscapes, abandoned safe compositions, and created scores that throbbed with tension, with release, with grief dressed up as resonance. One of those scores, a haunting string and piano composition written for a low-budget war documentary, earned an unexpected nomination at the Emmys. The recognition opened new doors, and suddenly, I wasn't just a composer for hire. I was invited to panel discussions, to festivals, to fundraisers where people started introducing me as the voice behind the strings. With the modest royalties and recognition, I launched a small foundation for underrepresented young composers, kids like I once was, passionate but invisible. Ellie, by then, had chosen to live with me full-time. She deferred college for a year and started filming a documentary on the hidden lives of women in music. It wasn't just a project. It was therapy. For both of us. Then came the gala. It was organized by the same bank where Kate and Brendan now reigned. She as a senior executive, he as a recently promoted board advisor. The event was intended to highlight the bank's cultural investment initiative, their polished attempt at social responsibility. My foundation had been listed among the honorees for its contribution to the arts. An invitation arrived in the mail on a thick cream envelope embossed with the bank's logo. I almost didn't go, but I did. I told myself it was for the students my foundation supported, for visibility, for professionalism. But deep down, I think I went to remind myself that I still existed beyond the confines of someone else's rewritten history. The venue was a restored opera house, baroque, gilded, flooded with soft lighting and curated conversation. People milled about in black ties and sequins, holding glasses of champagne, complimenting one another's charitable gestures. I spotted Kate within minutes. She hadn't changed much, still elegant, still composed. Her hair was longer now, her dress darker than usual. Brendan was beside her, his posture that of a man recently affirmed. They didn't notice me at first. Or if they did, they pretended otherwise. The evening moved on. A few speeches, a series of video tributes, a slideshow of community impact. My name appeared briefly during the featured organization's montage, accompanied by a short clip of one of my students rehearsing a piece I'd composed. I clapped politely. I sipped water. I stayed in my seat. Then, about halfway through the event, the host returned to the stage. She smiled wide, a practiced kind of grace, and announced something special, a surprise guest speaker, someone who, she said, had transformed hardship into harmony and had uplifted voices too long overlooked. She said my name. I felt time slow. I hadn't agreed to speak. I had been told I'd be acknowledged. Nothing more. I glanced to the event coordinator standing to the side. She motioned toward the stage, oblivious to the hidden fault line she had just stepped on. Applause. Confused faces. Whispers. I stood slowly. As I made my way to the microphone, I saw Kate's expression shift. Not dramatically, just enough. Her smile faltered. Brendan leaned forward slightly in his seat. Their table was now quiet. Watching. I didn't look directly at them. I looked at the crowd. A sea of polished strangers, benefactors, board members, artists, students. And I began. I didn't speak about betrayal. I didn't mention infidelity. I didn't point fingers. Instead, I spoke about choice. I told them how we often measure success by the visible, titles, salaries, appearances, but how true success is rooted in what we choose when no one's watching. I spoke of the young composers who had come through our program, how they wrote through trauma, through displacement, through poverty. I told a story about a girl from Tallahassee who wrote a 6-minute orchestral piece about her father's silence and how the judges at the youth festival cried in their seats. I paused. I looked at the crowd. And then I said this. My foundation has grown from a small dream into an institution with assets now exceeding $120 million. Until tonight, that funding was managed by a partner bank I believed shared our values. As of tomorrow, our accounts will be moved elsewhere. Not for financial reasons, but because culture begins with character, and character cannot be performed. There was a pause, then a murmur, then silence. Kate didn't move. Brendan looked down. I stepped off the stage. That was it. There was no confrontation afterward. No public scene. No fireworks. Just a change in the room's atmosphere. Small talk growing stiffer, glances shifting, executives recalibrating. That night, I walked through the back exit of the opera house into the humid Georgia air. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. Not because I'd punished anyone, but because I had finally spoken, not just literally but existentially. I had written myself back into the story, and in doing so erased no one but erased the lie that I had been erased. That microphone hadn't been a we asterisk p asterisk n. It had been a mirror. Revolutions rarely look like explosions. More often, they begin with whispers, slight, imperceptible shifts in tone, in attention, in posture. That night at the microphone was one of those whispers. A rebalancing of power, not through confrontation, but clarity. a refusal to remain quiet, a reclaiming. I left the gala without ceremony. No one stopped me on my way out. No press hovered by the door. No dramatic stares chased my heels. But I felt the shift behind me, not just in Kate and Brendan, but in the entire ecosystem they had built themselves into. A world where image was everything and character optional. The next morning, my phone began buzzing. Not with drama, with questions. Executives from the bank, people I'd met only briefly in formal settings, reached out. At first, it was under the guise of gratitude, thanking me for my words, asking how they could support the foundation further. But buried beneath the polished language was a current of anxiety. The kind that comes when someone senses there's more to the story and they're about to be pulled into it. Then came the calls from compliance liaisons and corporate outreach officers, people with clipped voices and too careful words. They weren't looking for conversation. They were looking for control. They asked why I had chosen to move the accounts, whether it was service-related, whether someone from their team had mishandled a transaction, whether this was a misunderstanding they could address. I gave them the same answer I had given the room. It wasn't financial. It was personal. I could hear their discomfort bloom through the speaker, masked in corporate diction and faux-concerned tones. They knew what I was saying without saying it. And worse, they didn't know how deep it went. In their world, relationships were liabilities. Quiet ones were the most dangerous. Over the next few weeks, whispers turned to rumors. The gala, which was meant to be a public relations triumph, had become a sore point. Other donors began asking questions, some quietly, some with intent. Our foundation wasn't just any client. It was one of the larger arts-focused endowments in the region. When word spread that we had cut ties with the bank, it raised more than eyebrows. It triggered reviews. Not official ones at first, just internal audits, a few compliance checks, a long meeting behind closed doors. But in a corporate culture driven by perception, that was enough to start the cascade. Brendan was the first to feel the ripple. He'd climbed the ranks fast, faster than most. That kind of rise always leaves a trail of resentment among peers, even if no one admits it. Now, the same colleagues who once toasted his promotion began to question its legitimacy. How had he managed such influence so quickly? Had personal relationships influenced professional decisions? Kate wasn't spared either. As a senior executive, she had built her image on professionalism and loyalty. But when those beneath her began to notice the favoritism, the blurred lines between personal and professional, the narrative changed. It wasn't just a love story anymore. It was a liability. She started losing ground in meetings. Her ideas, once embraced without question, were now subjected to layers of scrutiny. Projects she proposed were delayed. Brendan, once her visible ally, became a silent shadow. They were still together publicly, but the body language changed. Distance crept between them like fog between buildings. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their unraveling wasn't theatrical. It was slow, hollow. The kind of erosion that happens when the scaffolding of performance can no longer support the weight of truth. Meanwhile, my foundation received more attention than ever. Not because of scandal, but because of consistency. Other institutions reached out. Arts councils extended grants. My students were invited to festivals and fellowships across the country. I saw their faces in brochures, on panels, in closing credits. And quietly, I built. I expanded our programming to include young producers and sound engineers. Ellie curated a short documentary series about the overlooked history of female composers during wartime. It was picked up by a streaming platform with a small but loyal audience. She became something more than a student. She became a voice. Kate reached out once during that time. Just once. It was a brief email. Formal. Terse. She congratulated me on the Emmy nomination, praised Ellie's film, and said she hoped we could remain respectful moving forward. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before replying. I told her we already had. That was all. I didn't mention Brendan. I didn't bring up the gala. I didn't rub salt into any wounds. I didn't need to. She knew what she had lost. And more importantly, she knew why. Respect isn't something you demand in a boardroom. It's earned in silence, in consistency, in the way you show up when no one's watching. She had forgotten that, or perhaps never learned it. A few months after that email, I received word through mutual acquaintances that Brendan had taken a leave of absence. Personal reasons. The kind of language that corporations use when they're waiting for the storm to pass or preparing for a quiet exit. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just nodded and got back to work. Later, I learned that their relationship had end straining under pressure. It wasn't public, not yet, but those who worked close to them had end noticing the coldness, the distance, the absence of the spark they had once paraded so openly. In a world built on appearances, even a slight crack is too much. Meanwhile, Ellie thrived. She started mentoring new students in our program. She began writing her own scores, experimenting with dissonance and silence as narrative devices. I saw in her the kind of clarity I had once struggled to find. She didn't need to be told who to trust. She watched. She listened. She chose. One evening, we stood together backstage at a small venue where two of our students were premiering their collaborative piece. She looked at me, calm but certain, and said, "You didn't need to burn it down. You just needed to walk out." She was right. That's what the microphone had been. Not a fire. Not a P***n. A door. And walking through it meant something had to be left behind. Kate and Brendan weren't evil. They were simply selfish. They believed they could rewrite the truth and still be applauded. But truth doesn't vanish because it's inconvenient. It waits. And eventually it speaks. Sometimes in photographs. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes at a microphone. The damage they caused wasn't just to me. It was to their own integrity. To the people who trusted them. To the colleagues who watched them trade loyalty for infatuation. To the daughter who saw through the script and chose honesty over performance. People think justice is loud. It isn't. It's patient. It moves slowly through corridors where applause used to echo, until all that's left is what cannot be faked. I never wanted revenge. I wanted clarity. And sometimes that's punishment enough. Ellie chose me, not out of pity or obligation, but with quiet conviction. After the divorce, she asked to stay. Not because our house was bigger or life with me was easier. She saw things, heard what wasn't